That's not right.
No.
Can I do this? Nope. How do I stop that? Okay. Cool. That looks like it worked.
Yeah. I can hear you typing.
Now you can see what I typed.
Do you hear the white noise?
It's probably my computer fan.
Definitely.
If I mute.
Yeah.
I guess we'll start in like a minute or so.
Yeah. I'll give people a few more minutes.
Should we get started, Nicole?
Yep, we can get started. So welcome everyone and thanks for viewing. We're excited to be here talking to you about what it was like to build an app from scratch at FAIR. So FAIR was founded in 2017 on the belief that the future of retail is local. Our mission is to help connect independent retailers and brands and empower them to chase their dreams. Using the power of technology and machine learning, to date, we have built a thriving community of 250,000 active retailers and 30,000 brands. In June of 2021, we had our Series F funding where we raised $260 million at a $7 billion valuation. The mobile team at FAIR has 14 full-time engineers and 6 co-op students. We've released 2 apps so far. The first was the Retailer Marketplace app, where retailers can browse brands and purchase their products. The second is a live streaming app for brands to use during our virtual trade shows. And in total, we have over 320,000 downloads. So who are we? My name is Nicole, and I'm an Android engineer. And presenting with me today is Mark, who's an iOS engineer. I joined FAIR at the end of 2018, and Mark joined at the beginning of 2019. Together, we built FAIR's retailer app from the ground up. Today, the apps are responsible for 25% of FAIR's total business and is still increasing. We're going to talk to you about how we wrote an app from scratch. This presentation will dive into what kinds of work a mobile team does at different stages of a company. First, Mark will talk about the idea phase and how to turn an idea into a potential viable business. Then I'll talk through some of the practical steps we took when writing the FAIR app in the post-product market fit phase, followed by Mark discussing how to scale a mobile app and team from a few engineers to more than 20. And last, I'll talk about what kind of mobile teams exist in a very large company and challenges that we'll need to plan for as a future large company.
Cool. So I'll start diving into the idea phase here. So what exactly is the idea phase? At this stage, what you have is an idea, a target user segment that you want to focus on, a general plan for generating revenue, and a small group of people who are interested in executing on this vision. Your goal in this phase is to find product market fit for your space. So what is product market fit? Product market fit is when your users are using or paying for your product. They're also excited to use it and will advocate on your behalf to other users. Once you've found product market fit, your user base will begin to grow at a rapid pace. This is an indication that you're solving an important problem for your users. So how do you find product market fit? First, what you want to do is identify your target user segment. The narrower you make this segment, the easier it will be to find a problem to focus on, because you're going to be focusing on their very specific needs. So you want to start talking to users in this segment and get them to talk about their day-to-day challenges that they're facing. At this stage, you want to be careful to not suggest solutions at this point. You just want to listen to them. Sometimes users will suggest solutions to their problems. They're not always correct, but it's good to take note of it, but don't get fixated on that solution. Once you've talked to a bunch of users, what you want to do is aggregate your notes. And what you're looking for is patterns in the problems that your users are facing. Are people using hacks to accomplish their goals, like basically using something in a way that it wasn't originally intended? Are people using a spreadsheet for something that could be solved with like a dedicated tool? Once you identify the problem you'd like to focus on, you can start crafting a specific solution for that. At this point, you want to be very nimble. You're going to be trying out a bunch of different things, and it's likely that you're going to throw out a lot of code during this process. Your goal is to get feedback on your solution from your target users as soon as possible, so don't be afraid to fake data to get that feedback faster. You can even start sharing sketches or rough storyboards with your users depending on your problem space and what kind of validation you are looking for. On the iOS side, if you want to share an iOS app with your target users, you probably want to leverage TestFlight, which is provided by Apple. And a good way of doing this is before you write too much code, you can actually submit your empty project to Apple for a TestFlight review. And once Apple reviews it and approves it, they won't review any subsequent builds, assuming you keep the app version the same. So now what you can do is enable the public beta link for your app, and you can share that link out with your users to really easily install an app as you're building it. You can even do something like create a QR code for that link to make it super easy for users to get set up. The Google Play Store has a similar flow for Android apps. After a quick review, you can invite users to test your app using their Google account. If you do end up coding something to validate your solution, you really want to optimize for execution. It's okay to write crummy code at this stage to get something working faster, but always keep in mind that that code might live longer than you expect it to. Try using technologies that you're already familiar with. It's not a good time to try and learn something new since it'll slow you down. You want to really move fast at this point. On the iOS side, if you're comfortable with SwiftUI, it's an excellent prototyping tool that will allow you to move very fast. And for Android, you want to take a look at Jetpack, which has a lot of great components that can save you time when building things. So once you do have a solution to share, what kind of response are you looking for from users? Are they excited to see your solution to one of their pain points? Do they want to use it right now, even though it's in prototype form? Are they pulling to get your product? These signs indicate that you might have found a niche to satisfy, and that you should focus more effort here to improve the UX and kind of build around your prototype solution. But what happens if you don't see that? Is your app getting a lot of downloads, but people aren't sticking around? You might need to continue tweaking your solution or choose a different area to focus on. If you're meeting with users one-on-one, they might give you direct feedback for what's holding them back from using your solution. There could be a part of the problem space that you missed in your initial review, so be receptive to the feedback that they give you here. You can then take this feedback back to the team and kind of continue to iterate on your solution. So let's talk about personas. What kind of person does well at a company in this stage? First off, you want to have a bias towards action, which means opting to make a choice and observe the outcome instead of deliberating on that choice for too long. Don't be afraid to make mistakes at this point. Those are crucial learning opportunities. Build the team. Because the team is so small, the goals are so abstract, it's good to have some creativity here to kind of navigate this unknown area. You want to be fluent in a technical domain so that you can comfortably build prototypes at a rapid pace. There's also going to be a lot of technical challenges at this stage, so it's good to be comfortable with the kind of changing situation. Let's take a look at some of the technical challenges. You want to find the right balance between prototype code and scalable code. Since if your idea does catch on, you might have time to refactor. You're going to be kind of building on top of that as fast as possible. It can be pretty tough to accomplish this balance without a lot of prior experience in the space. But yeah, you just want to try and keep in mind you want to move fast, but also you might be living with that code for longer. What did FAIR look like in this phase? In order to get in touch with our target users, we visited trade shows, which retailers go to see products offered by brands in like a physical location. We would go booth to booth and try and convince them to join our platform by offering net terms when they order products wholesale and free returns. We didn't yet have a warehouse to store the returns. So to make things work, we used our office space to actually store the returns, of what you can see in this photo here. All those boxes are returns from our retailers. Since FAIR initially launched as a website, we didn't yet have a mobile app. To determine whether it made sense to build one, we leveraged our existing engineers and built a React Native app prototype in a few months. We then used the next 6 months to observe our users, and we saw huge adoption of the app. So we knew this was an important space to kind of invest in. This led us to hire a native mobile team to kind of build a solid foundation for the apps for years to come, which is when Nicole and I actually joined the team. This marks the FAIR's transition into the next phase, which is what Nicole's going to dive into in a bit more detail here.
Yeah, so as Mark mentioned, now we'll discuss the post-product market fit phase. At this stage, the mobile team has one or a few engineers working on each platform, and the company has found product market fit, but still needs to iterate on the business to make it profitable in the long run. The minimum viable or lovable product needs a lot more polishing and more features to be truly useful for the customers. And it's also unclear exactly how much user demand there will be, and as well as how much the company is going to scale. When we joined FAIR, the company was 1 year old and had found product market fit with brands and retailers using the desktop website experience. The React Native app was released before, as Mark mentioned, and it was gaining increasing popularity with the retailers. But at the time, React Native had limitations with performance and also didn't compile well for Android. And that's why we were hired to write the iOS and Android native apps for our retailers. Building an app from scratch is a very unique opportunity. And in order to be successful in this role, you need to be able to wear many different hats. You need to be resourceful because there may not be someone at the company who you can ask platform-specific questions to. You need to have a positive attitude and be enjoyable to work with in order to help build a great company culture. And you should be accepting and excited about change because nothing will stay the same for more than a few weeks. Be prepared for changing teammates, managers, priorities, and etc. You also need to start planning for the long term and lay foundational work that will benefit the team. Since you are the first founding member, you need to demonstrate leadership skills to help direct the team. A company may be mobile first or web first, and this can change over time. So a company is web first when they have an existing desktop website and all of the features are launched on the web first. In this scenario, mobile has to play catch up and implement all of the core features. This was the case for us when we joined FAIR. When a company is mobile first, they may or may not have a website, and all features are launched and designed initially for the mobile app. We'll now walk through the steps that we went through when writing the FAIR app. You'll likely want to rewrite most of the code from the proof of concept because it was optimized for speed, not quality. So let's assume at this point we're writing an app from scratch, knowing that it will have a several-year lifespan and have other developers working in the same code base. It's very important at this stage to establish good practices, but still be careful not to over-engineer and delay features being launched to customers. First, you need to know the app requirements. Understand the full experience that the app needs to offer. Does the app need an offline mode? Does the app rely heavily on the network? Will customers be using the app on the go? Should you code it for tablets or phones? Understand the target audience and what kind of devices they'll be using so you can set a minimum API that will include the majority of the target audience. And when doing this, keep in mind that some countries don't have widespread access to Wi-Fi, some countries use older phones, and age is also a factor in what kind of device the users will own. The app we were writing for FAIR was a shopping app for the retailers. Our target audience was American small business owners. In general, this group has more up-to-date phones, access to Wi-Fi while they were in their shops or homes, and they live in towns or cities that will most likely have a stable cellular connection. Given this information, we chose minimum OS versions that were only a few years old. We relied heavily on network to fetch most of the information shown on each screen. And we just didn't support an offline mode. We showed an error dialog when the user had no connection. And we designed for larger phone screens. Once you have the general app requirements, you need to prioritize the work that needs to be done. At this stage in the company, the goal still is to ship quickly and frequently. You should work with the product manager to prioritize the user-facing features. You need to determine what should be included in that initial release and what can you afford to ship as follow-ups after the initial release. You'll also be in charge of prioritizing the architectural features. From the start, you'll want a way to brick old versions of the app just in case there's a bad bug that shipped or if backend wants to clean up old endpoints. But a network caching layer is probably not necessary for the first launch. For FAIR's initial app release, we prioritized the core shopping experience. That included the login flow, ability to browse different products and brands, add products to cart and then check out, app bricking, and crash reporting. But what it didn't include was sign up, ability to edit account information, invoices page, chat, and then we also didn't have push notifications or deep linking. For some of the features that we were missing, we had buttons on the user settings screen that took the user to a web view with the FAIR mobile web page for that feature. It wasn't an ideal experience, but it was a good starting point. And then after that was initially launched, we kept on adding those features that were missing. You'll need to research different app architectures and pick one that's most appropriate for the app's product needs, as well as what's appropriate for the given platform. Try to use the latest libraries and architectures that are heavily used by the Android and iOS communities. Write code in a way that balances flexibility with simplicity, And keep in mind, the architecture will evolve over time as patterns become more clear with new features. So let it evolve naturally rather than trying to plan out everything at the start. Don't over-engineer and plan too far ahead. Focus on building for the features that are being implemented in the next few months, and don't get caught up in a bunch of hypothetical situations for the code. For our initial tech stacks, iOS went with an MVVM architecture with dependency injection using Swinject, and Android used an MVP architecture using Retrofit, RxJava, and Dagger 2. Both apps use Google Firebase for push notifications, crash reporting, and performance monitoring. It's extremely important that you write tests for your code. As the team grows, you want everyone to be confident that they are not breaking anything when they refactor the code, and this can't be accomplished without tests. We initially didn't write UI tests because they are very complex and often flaky. Instead, we focused on testing the business logic and decoupled all the business logic from the view. At Fair, we don't actually have a QA team. It's the engineers who are in charge of fully testing their features. Chances are you are going to be one of the few mobile experts at the company. Mobile apps offer an improved user experience over mobile web. So get to know the mobile UX paradigms and use them in the app. Android has material design that you can read about, and iOS has the human interface guidelines. If you're the only developer for iOS or Android, it's important that you connect with other developers outside of work to ask for advice. Knowing what other companies are doing can help guide you in the right direction for making important app decisions. Reach out to your network and ask for advice, even if you haven't talked to some of the people in a while. Most companies will likely have more than one client and only one backend. A user should have a consistent experience when using the product on the web, an Android phone, or an iPhone. Aim to design APIs that are what we call client-friendly, meaning that the client doesn't have to do any heavy business logic. Instead, that should be done on the backend, and the API response should return client-facing fields. This reduces bugs and inconsistencies across all the platforms. An example on the Fair app is our checkout screen. The checkout response includes a generic list of line items consisting of a string name and a money field. So for example, subtotal would be the name and $285 is the money amount. This allows the backend to update the line items whenever there's a new discount or a new tax added without requiring a client update and bricking old versions. The client can simply pull these values from the response and display them in the checkout screen. We wanted to avoid all three clients computing the discounts, taxes, subtotal, total, and every other line item to reduce the bugs and inconsistencies across our three platforms. You need to establish healthy coding practices, such as breaking your features down into small tasks and fully testing all code that is merged into the code base. Try to have someone reviewing your code, even if they're not on the same platform as you. Also, using a project tracking software so that your progress is clear and visible to the rest of the company is highly recommended. Then, when the app is ready to launch, you're also the release captain. So it's up to you to write a script to upload the build to the Play Store or App Store, fully test the app before releasing, and then once it's released, you need to be checking for crashes, responding to app reviews, and also monitor the app performance. Shipping the first version of an app is a huge accomplishment, but the journey is just getting started. You've been heads down coding for the last few months, but now it's time to focus on scaling and growing the mobile team.
Cool. So let's take a look at what scaling up looks like. What does your team look like at this stage? Your mobile team is likely between 5 and 50 engineers. The company has a winning formula, so you want to get more engineers on board to be able to do more faster. And your goal for this stage is to increase your team efficiency. What does the structure of the mobile team look like? Well, early on, you'll probably still have a single mobile team. If your company has a larger number of mission-driven teams than mobile engineers like Fair did, you may start lending out mobile engineers to those teams for months at a time. Over those Over time, those mobile engineers will become a more permanent part of those teams. So you want to try and balance a consistency for the mobile engineers while still satisfying the needs of your mission-driven teams. At this point, you ideally have a good architecture pattern in your project. You don't want to go to over-engineer it though, so try and keep things simple and build up from basic principles. You still want to move fast, so try not to introduce too much overhead in your architecture. Keeping things simple also makes it easier to ramp up new engineers who are going to be onboarding in this phase. You'll also start to find that new product requirements are going to start breaking your architecture patterns, so be prepared to adapt to those new requirements. Ideally, the code base is in a good state at this phase, so new engineers don't end up replicating bad patterns. Keeping technical debt under control here will pay dividends further down the line. Documentation is also very useful to help transfer knowledge or explain peculiar areas of the code base. You'll start to experience growing pains as time goes on. A lot of your processes that worked before won't work anymore. For example, release process crashes, PR reviews, code duplication, interview process, build times, app size are all likely to start breaking. When you address these pains, you want to try and take an iterative approach. You don't need to solve these problems forever, but instead try and focus on solving them for the short term. It's hard to predict what your team's needs will be too far into the future, so don't waste too much time worrying about that. One example we can take a look at is how our iOS team improved our release process at Fair. Initially, it was a very manual process with a very lengthy documentation checklist. It was around 70 steps to check off each week. Because of the App Store review, the whole process took like a day or two to run. What we found was that it was common for engineers to miss steps or forget to run something. Rather than trying to solve this problem forever for the company, we opted to create, do a small step and create a small command line utility to help automate the process. We use Swift package and Apple's argument parser framework, which I recommend if you're looking to build a command line utility. It makes it really easy to do. So we basically broke up our release process into 4 steps and leveraged other APIs and command line utilities under the hood to make the release process more robust and lightweight for the team to run. A role we started integrating at Fair is the DRE, or Directly Responsible Engineer. The DRE would be the engineering representative for a feature, and they'd work with the product and designers to make sure the feature was technically possible. Usually the role was taken up by one of the iOS or Android engineers on the team. So they would be responsible for creating a plan of action, detailing all the technical requirements, which then the other mobile engineer could then leverage when they're going to build the feature to save time and keep things kind of aligned between platforms. Something else you may need to consider in this phase is experiments. Some products will want to, or sometimes a product will want to run an A/B test for a feature to determine its impact. In case you're not familiar, an A/B test is where you show a new feature to only half of your users, and then you can use statistics to determine how big of an impact that feature had. You can either build a system in-house or leverage a third-party library to do this. At Fair, we decided to build it in-house so we could have more control over the process and kind of share it between the web and our mobile apps. So some things you want to consider for this. You want to figure out how your app is actually going to get the bucket value for a specific setting that you're going to be a setting for an experiment you're going to be running. And you want to put in protections in place to make sure that you don't accidentally ship a feature that's half built to users too early. And finally, you want the experience will make testing harder, so you want to be wary of that when you're going through your testing. It's also important to have analytics in the app to help measure your user behavior in aggregate. You'll want to have dashboards for important metrics that you care about, and it can help you keep an eye out for regressions as you continue to build on the app. It helps if you align between the two mobile platforms in terms of like naming of the events and trigger conditions, just to make the dashboards easier to build. Your mobile teams are likely to grow at different rates during this phase. This will likely result in apps diverging in terms of supported features. It's somewhat difficult to keep the apps perfectly in sync during this phase, but it still should be something you should strive for. So one strategy we actually used at Fair was to ship experiments on the platform that had more engineers, since it was more work to implement. And then that would allow the platform that had less resourcing to kind of catch up and stay in sync. The company culture is likely to change during this phase as the team grows. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's good to have company values for everyone to kind of rally around as you're growing. Generally, you want to have a cultural portion of your interview process to help control this area. Since you'll have more engineers joining the team, you want to make sure that your onboarding flow is smooth. Look for ways to automate your setup via scripts. One strategy we actually used at Fair is to assign buddies to new hires. So the buddy can answer any questions a new hire has for the first few weeks and can help them if they get stuck with anything. And now Nicole's going to take a look at a large company.
Yeah, so let's discuss what a large company looks like in the scope of a mobile team. So a large company will most likely have, and this is for tech companies, a mobile team of 50 or more developers. They'll have several apps available for users on Android and iOS, and the team is going to be spread across multiple offices. The entire company size is most likely 1,000 people or more, and the company is also most likely going to be public. One thing I will note is Fair is not yet at this size. We have about 600 people, but we're definitely on this trajectory. We're looking towards the future and planning for upcoming challenges. We don't have it figured out, but these are things we're thinking about. We'll discuss some problems and potential solutions based on other companies at this size. When working at a large company, there are two different types of personas depending on the level you're at in your career. At the junior level, it's a very well-defined role and roadmap, and you enjoy specializing in one area of an app development or product area. At the senior level, you'll see those larger scale problems that are going to be required to solve, so you should be open to leveraging existing solutions to drive business outcomes. There's also lots of different kinds of leadership opportunities at a large company. So there are mobile engineers and product teams focused on developing features for specific apps or specific product domains in an app. There are also mobile cross-functional teams that work on shared libraries across the company's apps. And there are platform teams that develop internal tools to support the different apps. In a large company, there are platform teams focused on higher level building blocks that will be used by the different apps. So for example, some of the focus areas are continuous integration or continuous deployment, app performance monitoring, developer tools, consistency and API design, debug tools, and UI components. The company needs to figure out what is worth standardizing across the whole company and what's best left to the individual app team to decide. Each app within the company may have a separate platform team that builds higher level architectural components. For example, the caching layer or the database layer. It's important for each app to have the freedom to choose an architecture that suits the app's product requirements. Some apps are network heavy and some are completely offline. This team needs to figure out what's worth standardizing across the whole app and what is best left to the individual engineers to decide. Giving engineers architectural freedom encourages innovation and experimentation. There will be common features between some or all of the apps that will have teams focus on those shared features. To avoid repeated work across different app teams, there should be dedicated teams that build these libraries for all the other apps to use. So for example, all of the apps probably have a login experience. They're going to have product analytics as well as advertisements, depending if you have to pay for the software or not. Each app has many product teams that develop user-facing features and follow product roadmaps. The product teams often have metrics they're trying to improve. A mobile engineer on these teams will work closely with the product manager, designer, and other back-end and front-end engineers working on the same features. As an engineering team becomes very large, it's important for the company to make sure that everyone feels their opinion matters and feels heard. that there is opportunity for team members to learn and have defined career paths, that the working environment is inclusive, and they should establish a collaborative and blameless culture. And also, they should be promoting employee physical and mental health. Some technical challenges a company may face are architecting the app in a way that allows many apps and features to be developed in parallel without stepping on each other's toes. But we also want to avoid knowledge silos, meaning there's little to no communication between different teams. As more people are involved, the overhead for coordination and alignment inherently goes up. A company needs to make sure that the development process doesn't slow down too much when multiple teams are involved in a single feature. As a code base ages, it's inevitable that parts of the code need to be rewritten. Engineers should see this as part of the natural life cycle of code rather than a failure to write something correct initially. So that is it for our presentation. There were some questions in the chat that we can answer first, and then if anyone else has any questions, feel free to add them to the chat. So the first question is from Isaac, and the question is, what was your favorite part of the process? Mark, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. Yeah, I'd say my favorite part is when we started to grow the team to be more than just us. That's something I hadn't done before in my career, and it was definitely like a challenge to try and kind of multiply myself to grow the team and like be more productive by not doing like all the work myself. So that was definitely a fun thing to do.
Yeah, I think my favorite part, and I mean, I'm enjoying where we're at now, but looking back, definitely the most unique thing we had was the ability to just make all of these architectural decisions and just start from scratch. For me, I was a year and a half out of university, and doing that type of work for a year and a bit of just constantly writing features and figuring out architecture really kind of jump-started my development, and I learned a lot in those years.
Cool. Looks like we have another question from Kelvin. Since Fair doesn't use React Native, what practices does it use to maintain consistency and prevent duplicate code across iOS and Android?
Yeah, do you want to? I can start with this one. So one thing that we looked into before we started was using Kotlin multi-platform. And that was the first idea of how we can reduce code duplication. We prototyped with it a bit, but ultimately 3 years ago, it just wasn't in the state that you could use for a business application. Like every time you needed to do something, it was just either maybe broken for the whole community or it took hours to figure out. So then we just stuck with our native platforms. And then, but what we've been working towards to reduce the code duplication is having these client-friendly APIs where the backend has most of the business logic, which helps with a lot of duplicate code.
Cool. What motivated you to get started with Fair? I can go first on this one. Yeah, when I found out about Fair, I think the thing that motivated me the most was like kind of being able to do like from scratch, build up the app and like have full control over like the architecture as it was going. It's kind of like greenfield type thing, which I hadn't had the opportunity to do before. And it was also nice that it was kind of like a post-product market fit situation where we could just kind of like, we know exactly what we're building. So it was very easy to kind of build something up and kind of run with it there.
Yeah, and for me, I was already kind of looking to leave my company at the time. And so a recruiter who I had known from a past job who currently worked at Fair reached out to me on Instagram to ask me to join. And so that kind of kickstarted that. And I talked to our CTO, Marcelo, and he was just very passionate about the idea. And I liked the concept that Fair had and liked the idea of helping small business owners kind of chase their dreams. So I definitely identified with the mission and wanted to be a part of it. Next question is, What worries did you have when starting with Fair? Did you have any fears or were you intimidated by anything?
Do you want to go first or me?
Yeah, I can go first. Yeah, so as mentioned, I was only a year and a half out of school. And so I joined Fair and I was the first mobile engineer. And kind of when I joined saying you need to also hire a senior Android engineer because I don't really know what I'm doing. And then it's a startup, so it's kind of hard to recruit people when the business is just starting. So it did end up just being me, but I had a great Android mentor who helped me and I would pair with. But I just you take it day by day and you just use the resources as mentioned in the presentation. I reached out to people I had previously worked with and I joined an Android Slack community. So you just have to be really resourceful and just, again, take it day by day and don't let yourself be intimidated by the entirety of the project and just look the next week or two in front of you and figure out what you need to do.
Yeah, for me, I think before I had joined Fair, I was freelancing for 2 years. And then even before that, I was kind of just like the only engineer at a company. So when I joined, I felt like a little bit of imposter syndrome where like maybe the stuff that I had learned before was like already out of date. Like Nicole was talking about like using the same architecture pattern on both platforms and stuff. And I had like no idea what these patterns were. So I was like a little bit worried that I was like getting old. But yeah, everything worked out after that. Like we
Any
have a
other
few more minutes for
questions?
questions. Cool. Maybe we can call it there then. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for your time. Bye. Oh, there's another one. How did you start your careers compared to where you are now?
I can go first on this one. Yeah, I bought a MacBook right before I graduated because I wanted to kind of play around with iPhone apps. So it was very much like kind of my hobby that I kind of turned into a job. I was just like constantly learning and like constantly building projects. I think I have like over 100 projects that I've started on my computer and counting. Yeah, and I was just kind of like, I was like super lucky to get a job out of university with like a few months of experience on iOS and just kind of kept with like a learning attitude and kept pushing myself to get where I am now.
Yeah, for me, I'm a bit opposite. I do not like to do coding outside of school and work. I love it, but only at that quantity. So I started to learn Android in one of my co-op jobs. I was working at an innovation lab, and so I learned Android there, which then helped me get more like higher quality Android roles at bigger companies. And then out of school, I accepted a job at the last company I had worked for full time, and that's a really good way to just kind of get yourself started after university with a full-time job.
We got one more question here, I think. So can we go into some detail on why Fair went with iOS and Android native apps over React Native?
Yeah, so I think we'll preface this with React Native has come a long way in the last 3 years. And if we were writing it from scratch now, it probably would have been more of a toss-up whether we'd go with React Native or not. Like I know Shopify uses React Native for I think all of their apps now, and it works really well for them. But at the time, there were a lot of limitations with it. So they had the React Native app and they tried to compile it to the Android app. And for whatever reason, it just didn't work. So they weren't able to release it on Android. And there were a lot of performance issues at the time. It still felt very much like a mobile web app, and it was missing those native experiences to it. But like I said, I think now in the last 3 years, it's come a long way. And I think if you're just doing kind of a more simple app that doesn't have a lot of computation on the front end or a lot of intensive things on the front end, it should be considered. That being said, you still need some knowledge of native app development in order to like fully build a React Native app.
Yeah, I think there was also some performance issues around like the image caching and like our infinite list scrolling stuff, which was another reason why we switched to native.
Yeah, the cycle reviews, I think back then were not performant at all, but now they have pretty much fixed that issue.
Cool. Any other questions before we head out? Okay, I think that's all the questions now. Thanks again, everyone.
Yeah, bye. Thank you.
Yeah.